Hello, everyone. Welcome to Leading with Agility, the show that uses the world around us to explore how leadership can be inspired by agility. I'm your host, Arif, and as always, I'm joined by...
Myself, TK, someone that definitely gets inspired by agility.
Thank you, TK. And, well, today, what are we talking about? By the time you listen to this episode, the results of the UK's general election will be known to the world, and we will have most likely a brand new Prime Minister. And as part of that, I suppose, TK, quite fitting, perhaps, to an extent, I thought we'd explore this topic of power, since all these candidates are effectively vying for power, aren't they? Vying for power and control.
Well, there might not be something that they would talk like it, but maybe they are.
Yeah, well, they need power in order to enact change. But the question I was
thinking, they want, eh?
Yes, exactly. The question I was thinking about is how can leaders avoid being trapped by it as they ascend that kind of corporate leadership hierarchy? Well, given most of you are listeners, are working in organizations, I doubt any of you are politicians. I'll be interested to hear if we have any politicians listening to our show. Please do reach out. And
well, the modern world is quite political, so might be a part-time politician.
Maybe. Please do reach out and connect with us. I'm always happy to chat. But yes, for the rest of you, how can one avoid being trapped by it, and what do we mean by that as well? So that's what I wanted to talk about in this episode, and also maybe there's always this perception or view that power corrupts, doesn't it, or has the capacity to corrupt an individual.
That's what they say, I guess, and maybe it's important to explain what we mean by being trapped by power. I guess many people seek power, so why is it a trap?
Well, exactly. Well, that's what we'll start off with. And I also wanted to, as I said, discuss how can it be used in a quote unquote good way, as in perhaps used to great effect as opposed to harm or anything like that. So let's just break it all down in today's episode, TK.
Yeah, let's. And I'm really interested how we define power then.
Great question. That's a good starting point, I suppose, in the context of where I started the episode with the election coming up, or elections and voting happening in the coming days. The gist of it, as in from my point of view, is it's the idea of control, isn't it? You have the ultimate authority to make decisions, to control what is happening around you, and decide on what you want to do, what you don't want to do, and that it has that having a vast impact on everyone around you and underneath you. And ultimately, that power is about a kind of distance between you as the authority maker and those who are impacted by your authority.
Holy moly, right? It's an interesting one in terms of So if we decide power this way, it's the ability to make decisions that influence or force people to do certain things, or so on. So with great power comes great responsibility, and one would assume that a prime minister has certain powers, including the deployment of nuclear arms, which can have an impact. As an example.
A devastating one. Let's not get into that, TK. That's not what we want.
Right. Oh, sorry. I thought
not interested
this kind
in
of
that. Those consequential things at the moment. But yes, the point is valid. They have a high impact in terms of how what they do can cause effect, or has an effect, right? So with that definition in mind, let's just talk about this idea of a trap. How can it be a trap? How can power in a leadership position, in fact, trap you from perhaps realizing your potential or being effective or productive? I don't know, TK. Let's start with, if we're starting with that, have you ever worked with anyone or been in an organization where you've maybe been in a leadership role yourself, but worked with a leader where you've maybe looked at their performance and thought, I don't think they're being as effective as they can. And maybe is there something to do with the fact that they're occupying a position that they're quite unfamiliar with that is affecting their ability to be, fully, I suppose, performant, shall we say?
Oh yeah, so Peter's principle, one would say, right? So yes, but I'm just wondering if this is necessarily tied to their influence and position, and if that's necessarily a trap. Because if I read your question, literally, it's the Peter's principle, which is you get someone's promoted to the level of their incompetence. So that's one thing. Second of all, I would say that I think what we mean here is that someone has so much impact, which we call power, which is a decent word, but not my favorite one. But someone has so much impact, which puts so much responsibility on them that it paralyzes them or makes them less effective. And I'm just yes. I have seen people like this. Thankfully, I haven't had the chance to work with them because, thankfully, because I think this would be a bit of a tragedy for such a person and the people that look up to them for leadership.
So, you asked for a definition of power.
Yeah.
Some research defines power as being the ability to influence others. Okay. So you touched on it earlier in your definition, but that is one piece of research that defines it. And and beyond that, there is also research that categorizes power in different ways. So maybe this might help with some of your conundrum of knowing whether it was because of that power, that they were possessing, whether or not that was inhibiting their ability or not.
Okay, to tell.
Yeah. So you can get power which is coercive,
Okay.
So you're based on your position, you have the ability to penalize or punish people, right? For contravening rules and norms and whatever. It's like a teacher at school maybe can issue detentions to any child. The opposite, of course, is then rewarding for good work, good behavior, etc. Again, that's a form of power you have. So it's beyond. Now we're going beyond this idea of it's just purely about influence. You can see that, right? And then there are other types of definitions. There are other categories of power. Defined in within this research, describing it as power being either legitimate, as in it comes from my status of the role I'm possessing or the role I'm in. I have some formal authority in my job. A judge, for example, right? He has clear authority, can make decisions, enact them, and has a consequence. Or the prime minister, like we've been talking about, that's a legitimate power type. And then there's the interesting one is a bit like this influencer dynamic, which is called a referent power. So this is where people like or refer to someone because they have some affinity towards them for something. I think an influencer is that type of referent power. People now can look at influencers as a standard or as a person or a person who is a source of knowledge or is a source of guidance towards them. That's an interesting type as well, isn't it?
So all of these types exist.
Yes.
Some of them can be less effective than others.
Definitely.
If you think about that, some of them may not be necessarily compatible with like our view of leadership. But so what, right? We've listed types of power, but I guess, as you said, some of these can make you less effective. Some of them can put you in a situation of being in a trap.
So how does that happen? I mean, there is some of the reading I was doing. I don't know if we need to go through all of them, but what I mean by trap, I think, is that you are perhaps lost in this position of power, and that is in not allowing you to then be fully performant. That's kind of what I was talking about earlier.
Okay,
so an example,
that's a hypothesis. Go ahead.
an example could be you become more complacent. You think that, okay, now that I'm in this leadership position, I got here because I know a lot. I have been rewarded for that. I am very experienced. I'm very knowledgeable. So I suppose I don't need to get involved in everything as much anymore. I've now achieved my position. I'll let everyone else do what they need to do, and I don't have to be maybe as curious.
That's a good one, but
Yeah.
I would argue that it's not necessarily derived from power, more derived from position. Now, obviously, in many situations, position and power go hand in hand.
Exactly.
But what you've just quoted is someone achieving a certain status that may make them complacent. Whether they have power or not is, I guess, secondary.
Well, yes, but then you're already considered an expert, you see. So this goes back to that point I meant about the power type of a referent power. So a referent power would be considered an expert in their field. Those are, like I said, influencers somehow, I was, okay, here's an example. I was at a, as you know, TK, a motorcycle festival over the weekend.
Yes,
had a great time.
Many experts, I guess.
And yes, they had a array of speaker stages. And they had foremost well-known people within the motorcycle world coming and giving talks. And it was different things for different people. You have like people who have now become really big YouTube stars in the motorcycle fraternity. And okay, this is subculture, I get it. But within...
Are women not allowed to ride?
Oh, of course they are. I said certain people.
Community.
Community. What did I say? I'm sorry. Fraternity. Okay. I apologize. Community, motorcycle community. And this is a subculture within a subculture because this was specifically around adventure motorcycle riding. So this is a niche within a niche. But bear with me, listeners, where I'm going with this. So we had, YouTube stars along with people who have, for example, ridden round the world on a solo adventure on their motorcycle and were coming to give their experience and talk about what they've learned and discovered and places they've been to, etc. And then you got YouTube stars, and what I mean by YouTube stars, they do really cool things with their bike on and film it for YouTube and get clicks and all the rest of it, and they become well known for that. But are they really experts in what they do? But they have become a referent power because people look up to them. And so
I get it, yeah.
With that type of kind of position, then people have these expectations that, one of the guys' name's Adam Riemann. Okay,
okay, let's take him.
He's Australian. He's done motorcycle journalism in the past. He's competed in enduro motorcycle racing. So he's got a level of skill and he's also very experienced in what he does. And he can throw a bike around amazingly and film it, and it looks great on TV or on video. Absolutely fantastic. So. And then he came along, and I was actually a bit disappointed. And I'll tell you why. Because he came along, I went to his talk, and I was expecting him to talk on a topic or a subject, give some experience. And he does a lot of tips, and he does a lot of shares a lot of tutorials online, and he films them. And they're great for learning. So I thought, I'll get some of that. So I'll get some cool insights, something different, something I can try, on my bike or whatever. And it was just a kind of a semi-panel discussion, but it was more about his life in general. There wasn't anything really substantive, and I didn't really learn anything, and I was a bit disappointed. And it's to this point about complacency. Now, I'm not saying he became complacent, and because he was frequently acknowledging that his rise in the YouTube world is down to all the people who like, subscribe, and watch his videos and all of that. He did acknowledge that a number of times, and he was very humble. He was humble about it. But at the same time, I was really looking for some real value, and I didn't get it. And it's kind of like, I was a bit disappointed. And me and the friends we thought, that wasn't what we wanted. So there you go.
Okay, so the point
A
is
long story,
when someone
sorry.
reaches a certain status,
Yes.
again,
Yeah.
maybe disputing the power thing, although you say this is the referent power, they might feel complacent, like they don't need to put in the effort
Exactly.
to be a proper,
Exactly.
informative source of information, or whatever you're looking for, versus someone that's not yet there that can actually put it in, and this is the trap of complacency. Okay,
There
well,
you
all
go.
right.
There you go.
This can happen,
You got it.
and I've seen examples of it myself.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah. Another example. Let's pick up something else,
Okay.
which I thought, which was interesting. It's similar but related, and this is where it's known as the avoidance trap.
Ooh,
So you
fancy name.
Yeah. So you're basically looking for shortcuts. So you get to that power position. You now have, a degree of autonomy to make decisions. We talked about that definition, whether it's about influencing others or maybe, you're able to make decisions, tell people what to do directively, whatever it is, right? You've got all that power now. Instead of then getting involved in the, I say, difficult decisions or making choices which might be hard, you avoid them altogether and you outsource them to other people. So you do the things that are straightforward and easy, but the things that are a bit tricky, can you deal with that? I'm not really interested in that. I don't want to get involved in that conversation. It's a bit difficult. I'm not going to give you that really hard feedback. It's a bit sticky.
Oh, that's brilliant, Arif. We teach people to delegate all the time. So what's the difference?
Well, there you go. But it's a selective delegation. That's the nuance here for me.
Okay.
It's a case of I delegate the things I don't want to do, and I'll just keep the ones I like to do because they're easy for me, as opposed to because they're beneficial for me to delegate those other things. I think that's the nuance.
It's all about the attitude, and it's all about the actual reasons you have, right? So you might delegate in a way that's ineffective just because you are, you want to optimize your effort, not to say you were lazy or you don't like certain things, and you just don't want to do them, even though you're the most talented, the most appropriate person. You just delegate because of these reasons rather than effectiveness. Okay, yeah, that's the difference. Yes.
Yeah, and I think there's also, and I suppose the impact on that is then there's the link back to the curiosity point with the complacency trap, which is it just dulls your motivation over time, surely. Because then if you're just doing the basic easy stuff all the time, you're not getting. How do you maintain that motivation to really push and be super effective and be present and do the best you can at work and all the rest of it? I think there's a question mark there.
That's an interesting one, right? So essentially what I'm getting from what you're saying is the fact that just because you have an opportunity, you're tempted to fall into this trap. So you could say, as we are ourselves, Arif, business owners, and, we have to work in a certain way, definitely different than employment. One would say when someone is an employee, there's an opportunity for them to slack off a bit, right? Because they're getting paid every month. But, it's the same principle of, because there is an opportunity for you, because now you have this power to tell people what to do so you don't have to do it, you can fall into exploiting this opportunity for your own ill,
Well, it may not be ill gains, but for your own gains, right?
But if it's positive, then it's delegation. Now, that's the difference, isn't it?
Yes.
So it's not a trap, it's something virtuous. But if you're doing it because you just don't like to do these things, even though it's appropriate for you to do them, that's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So interesting one, isn't it? So that's one. And,
maybe important to believe and reflect on whatever you do, on whatever situation you are in, power or not power. What are the reasons you're doing particular actions, right? So if you have an opportunity to avoid, are you avoiding it for the right reasons or the reasons that might hurt you?
One more that I want to touch on, which is I think quite a common one, and I think many of our listeners will probably recognize it. It apparently known as a stress trap.
Mm-hmm.
But we have talked about stress in the past. We've got an episode we did with earlier on in our season with Jurgen, talking about Jurgen Klopp deciding to leave Liverpool and the stress he's been facing that caused him to get to that decision. So feel free to check that episode out. However, the point here with stress, which I found was interesting, is that obviously when you are in a stressful situation, it affects your behavior, right? And I'm sure we can all think of leaders we've worked with or witnessed who have behaved differently under that pressure and show up differently. And what's the interesting thing that everyone seems to maybe we miss, we don't recognize enough, is that stress then creates secondhand stress, because basically you're passing the stress on to the people underneath you and around you. Right?
Well, yes, I can imagine that that's happening. Any time anyone collaborates, especially if you're looking up to someone for leadership and you see them being stressed, it must influence you somehow, I guess.
Well, now, but then you've got the power dynamic complication as well. You see,
okay.
if it's peer to peer, is one thing, because okay, my colleague's really stressed. Oh, I hope he's okay. You may think about it. You may be a bit worried for him, concerned for him or her. Sorry. But in this situation where there's a dynamic and there's someone in power, your leader or leader's leader, whoever it is, clearly under stress, creating more stress for those around and underneath them, what that means is then you're now in a difficult situation, because you're thinking, maybe you might think, oh, there's something personal here, or I've done something wrong. Am I the problem? Have I caused this stress? There's a whole host of other anxieties that come up, I think, for people. Or can do.
It's actually a very big thing in terms of double mental psychology and parenting.
Right.
When it comes to that, obviously, power dynamic being there too. How, children believe that they did something wrong just because parents are stressed.
Yes.
And I think the same can apply in the world of work. I think, why wouldn't it apply? And it does. And it's just like, oh my God, what have I done, right? You always seek it onto yourself. And because the person has power, they obviously get amplified.
So, okay, I wanted to circle back to the elections, but before we do that, I'm looking at the clock. Let's have a break.
Well, wait, Arif, before we have a break,
okay.
I have something I want to talk about. Just to interrupt you for the break, before our listeners get to a break, there's one trap, because I actually have some research it too.
Yes.
And there's a trap that I have to share something about, which is the savior trap.
Oh, yes.
Which is when you have the power, the authority, whatever you call it, the influence, and you're being identified as someone that, is leading, and then you feel like everything is dependent on you, and you need to help everyone to achieve the results. You're giving advice. You're being asked and having all the answers. I personally fall into this quite a lot, Arif, as you must have seen.
Okay, tell me more. Where have you? Is this? Who are you saving, TK?
Well, just to skip some names. What happens quite often is, first of all, there are some people in our team, not mentioning names, that, for instance, can be forgetful. So I find myself like, oh, do you have to remember to put it in your diary? Or maybe there are some other members that I can see that, for instance, I need to give advice to, or some other members that, I just feel like sometimes, because, I do take care, I can fall into this trap of seeing myself as a savior. And it's a huge thing, unfortunately, which, I do have to work on. So I can definitely relate to this particular trap. So, for instance, what happens, and it's very interesting, when if you've definitely experienced it, and you've seen people doing this to me, when I'm being asked questions left and right. Simple things that someone even, I don't think anyone did, but I can imagine that someone will eventually ask me what day of the week it is, because they think I have all the answers. And I'm always like, no, don't ask me that. Go and check it yourself. I don't want to know that. It's like, I'm not the information box on an airport, just because, I have, I'm not saying a mental fortitude, but I have the ability to accumulate information. I probably know things. Just because of that, it's just difficult for me to constantly give the answers. So I refuse them. I said, no, I won't tell you. Even though you probably know I know it, I want you to go and find it yourself, which is an interesting one. And it's definitely a trap that I'm falling into, one of these traps. And I definitely can relate.
Thank you, TK. Thanks for sharing. And with that, let's go for a break. So we'll be back in a few moments. And thank you very much, everyone. Are you looking for even more content from Humble Associates? Well, we've just the treat for you, as we'll be running our next live LinkedIn webinar on Tuesday, July the 16th, titled The Key to Innovation, Unlocking Your Leader's Potential. Joining us will be Will La, the founder of Kakapo Labs, a multifunctional tech incubator known for its creative approach to problem solving. At Kakapo Labs, Will and his team explore the boundaries between various forms of media, producing thought-provoking, innovative products. Their work marries digital technology with traditional and non-traditional applications, partnering with diverse individuals from business owners to artists. Don't miss out on practical tips and inspiring stories from Will and all of us at Humble, as you'll learn how to lead with innovation and drive success in your organization. To find out more, head over to our website, humble.associates, to register and join the webinar. See you there. Welcome back to our listeners, and thank you for sticking with us. And before the break, we were discussing a range of potential traps that leaders who are in positions of power may find themselves falling into. TK shared some stories, as did I.
Present company included, yes.
Yeah, as did I on a number of examples where we've seen this happen. But if we just circle back to the elections, TK, as I said I would,
Okay.
and we've got these candidates vying for power. I mean, if we're talking about leading a country, I mean, you can't get any more pressure than that. So is it really, I just thought I'd raise this as an open question. Is it unavoidable for a leader of a country, you know, whatever the role title is, president, prime minister, et cetera, to avoid any of these traps? I mean, you know, you're going to be in such a high pressure role where it's probably easy to fall into that stress trap. It might be quite easy to fall into that avoidance one, because frankly, there's so many things, you know, vying for your attention. You may, maybe not that savior one like you were describing, TK, but maybe that complacency one, as shameful as it might be to even consider. But I'm just wondering out loud, do you think it's possible?
I think it is quite possible to avoid these traps. And I believe I have a way to do it. And it's not, okay, so it's not a simple way of just like mental fortitude and avoiding them consciously, because that's really hard. And the more pressure you have in a situation with more, I hate the word power, but, you know, okay, fine, a head of government, head of state, you know, whatever, you know, huge responsibility. The way some of these positions, especially in the modern world of very fast information flow and very fast decision making, I believe might be not suited for a single person to handle. Now, what do I mean by that? We are used to leadership being a single person activity, a buck stops with someone. Right? The chief executive, Mr. President, the prime minister, and I will not mention any more titles, doesn't need to be the case. What I think would be much better, and I've done personal research and interviews, and it's one of the pet topics of mine, is team leadership, which is instead of one single person, even though one of these people might be the head, the pinhead, you lead as a tightly knit team. So Arif, I will ask you a question. Do you know who is the Prime Minister of Switzerland?
I don't.
Well, you don't, right? But I will encourage you and our listeners to see how the Swiss government works.
Okay.
They lead as a team and they rotate the role across ministers. It's a very unique system they have. And you don't hear about that because none of them is a strong, I'm sure they're all strong personas, but none of them promotes themselves to be, you know, the one and only, right? So that's a typical, and, you know, Switzerland is doing quite okay usually.
Well, that's an interesting point now. You're talking about governance model right there and how power is distributed.
Well, it can be applied to different kinds of leadership, different organizations, right?
Yeah. But my point, what I'm trying to say is you're describing a power distribution model there. And Switzerland, I'm sure that's a fantastic example, as you said, worth our listeners and probably me looking into it. And then you go outside of the Western concept, and there are other examples of that as well. And you go to, for example, in Asia, there are countries where they use a more consultative power distribution model, where decisions are made in a collaborative manner. That also can happen as well. So that also not happens. Excuse me. That also does occur. So yeah. So it is fascinating to compare this concept of a single, person versus a distributed model. Could be quite interesting.
Yes, and I think this is another episode of our podcast. By the way, they're called a federal council, and I'm sure that we'll put the link to like a wiki page or in the notes.
Episode notes. Yes, I'll do that. Thank you for the reminder, TK. Appreciate that. Really good.
But that's one of the ways to deal with that, right? To basically enhance yourself to a team that can handle these huge pressures in a way that will enable you not to fall into these traps. That's the long-winded answer.
Thank you. With the remaining time we've got, not long, but I thought let's just flip the conversation a little bit and explore power from a more positive perspective, right? In the sense of how to leverage it in the right way, avoid it being a trap for you, and what it is used for. And I think it will link back to that definition I shared earlier on, as in power being defined around your ability to influence, right? Influence others specifically. So reading some other research, studies showing that individuals, for example, who have political skills in an organizational setting tend to be better in gaining more personal power, as well as managing stress and job demands, than those who don't have those political skills. Now, that's interesting. And
that all explains my experience, yes.
Yes, exactly. That does explain your experience. And I wonder if that links also to what we've been talking a little bit about. Are you navigating the hierarchy, etc., through your network as opposed to more about your skill level? So who you know and all of that. I don't know if that's a positive thing per se, but the point here being that if you do understand how things happen in an organization, who decides what, who's talking to who, where does the influence sit, and if you can understand all of that and then make sure that you are around those circles so that you're aware of what's going on, you can use that to your advantage in order to, get to where you want to get to into your career, and then use that to create influence in the organizational setting.
Well, of course. I think, if you define political acumen, awareness, or skill as the ability to form relationships and then I don't know, it makes sure you trade favors or make sure you place yourselves in positions that, people support you and your agenda. That's definitely something that I guess will help you get to places. So no doubt about it. It's like not for everyone, I guess.
The question is using that in the right way then, right? Okay, you do that. Are you using it for ethical purposes or unethical purposes? And again,
this goes back to the beginning of our conversation, right? Delegation and what's the other trap? Yeah.
Yeah. Not that we didn't talk about we talked about complacency and
yes, but we talked also about avoidance versus proper delegation, and the difference is
correct.
What are the reasons, and is it beneficial or not, right? And you can use your political skill for the benefit. It's like again, TK personal story. I should have a jingle. The interesting thing is, and way back when, I have been trained and worked as a project manager. Oh. What it means is, yes, I might have mentioned that, I had various roles. But the interesting thing about being a project manager, if you understand it correctly and you really understand what you're supposed to do, is you are working for the project and your project is supposed to be successful. Now, and this is something that I've been saying, maybe not on the podcast actually, that the role has a bit of a problem because you might get to a situation that you prioritize the needs of your project and personal success because your role is associated with a project with the overall organization's success. No, I'll stop at that.
No, thank you. That's a good point. And
so this is like using politics to, hope not the greatest benefit, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what I wanted to mention, the ethics point of view. So the ethics part of the conversation here, because, and again, for our listeners, we've discussed ethics in an earlier episode in this season. So please do go back and check that one out. But specifically here, I think, how you then use your power or use your political acumen to gain that influence, etc. What do you then do with it? Now, using it in the right way is then, I think, to hold everyone else in power equally accountable. You are in a position of influence now. You can make change happen. Hold other people to accountable. Are they behaving in the right way? Are they doing things in the way they should be doing? All of that, I think, in a way, is more of I think there's even an element of moral responsibility, shall we say. So, you can debate that with me, Tige, but I think there is something there.
I'm curious too.
Yeah, in terms of you have a greater responsibility to make sure things are happening in a way that's fair, equitable, reasonable, whatever word you want to use.
I think it just scales, Arif. I think we don't need to go as far as you use the words like ethics and, the greater good.
I think ethics are important.
No. That definitely makes sense, right? In some situations, like you will use the, MPs and the Prime Minister, obviously there are in positions where using these grand terms is applicable. But I will also say that even if you have a small influence, you're a leader of a, not too much power, you can still do well for the system you're in to realize the mission of, the organization, the people, your team, and so on, equally, right? I would necessarily employ ethics and use this grand view here? It's debatable that you can use this for everything because we can get into utilitarian philosophy and so on quite quickly. There.
Okay, so you've got let's just. I will take you to task a little bit there, TK.
All right.
We've got plenty of stories now in the workplace of toxic leadership, of people abusing their positions of power in various ways, acting in a discriminatory way, acting in a way that is harmful to employees. We've got plenty of all of that.
Do.
Now, if you've come into a position of power and you've navigated this political world somehow, you've got there, and you don't do anything, knowing all of that is going on and it's wrong, I think that's a moral stain, really. I will go that far. I will say you aren't being a upstanding, reasonable leader. Your job there is to hold power accountable. You're seeing it right in front of you. And if you can't handle it, then you shouldn't be in that organization. So either you stay there and make change happen, or you sit there quietly and take benefit from your role, do nothing, then you're just essentially part of the problem. So this is why I take a strong view on this, and I think ethics is absolutely crucial.
So quite a strong view, Arif, and I can imagine that you've seen many things, I've seen many things, and we've talked about discrimination, the lack of diversity, and all kinds of nasty things, plus more that can happen, we're not even mentioning. And you're absolutely right that needs to be called out. Having said that, I think we shouldn't reduce the conversation to a comic book style. Okay, with great power comes great responsibility.
No.
I will say more than you.
Yeah.
I will say it's everyone's responsibility to call it out, whether you have power or not. These things cannot go on.
Yes, but you know as well as I do, and we've discussed it already, that,
we did.
That those who are in power are the only ones who can make the change happen, right? And ultimately, what ends up happening is those who aren't in power, who call things out, suffer first. And sadly, we have too many examples of people who are whistleblowers, for instance, being treated as the criminals when they haven't done anything wrong apart from reveal the underbelly of what's going on in an organization.
Or found dead in hotels when they worked in a certain airplane company. Yeah, so not mentioning any names.
There we go. Yeah. But funny enough, that gentleman from Boeing, sorry, just very quickly on that, we featured him in our episode again. So this is our third reference to a previous episode in this episode I'm making. But please check out that episode on Boeing. That poor chap who sadly lost his life, we featured some of his thoughts when we were discussing what was going on there. But there you go.
So it's not that I don't support your point, Arif, that, if you are going and aspiring to be in a position of, I will use this word again, high power, you have the responsibility to do good. Well, I can only agree with that. I think that, it's just important. And if you're not doing that, it's interesting for the reasons why it might not happen. Maybe it's just that you don't feel like you can. You don't feel like it's your place to do anything because there's always a bigger fish. But it's, I guess, a separate episode of our podcast.
Here's something that may, I think, be more aligned to what you're thinking. And maybe I can present this argument in a slightly different way, which is, perhaps being in power is nothing to do with, is not only to do with how high you up in an organization. Okay. So you could be a leader or a manager, a middle manager, for example, someone a bit lower than that. Maybe you're a bit senior, but you're not quite at C-suite. It could be anywhere. But you have influence through the network you've created. You've developed a vast network of people within the organization who you can rely on to make things happen because they trust you, you trust them, you've developed the right relationships with them, etc. So perhaps, yes, you're right. It's not about the hierarchy, but then leveraging all of that to help make change happen. And a quote for you. This is a Harvard Business School professor, Julie Batilana. Always get the names every episode. Of course you do.
It's a staple.
Oh gosh, this is a setup. I thought you were
going to quote Karl Marx with power to the people, but go ahead. Yeah.
Every episode I get this. I'm sorry. Anyway, the quote is: she says, "People confuse power with authority, but authority is no guarantee of power, and you don't need to be high in the hierarchy." I like that one. I think she's got a real good point there. What do you think, TK?
Yeah, I can't beat that.
You can't beat that one, can you?
It's a great quote, right? The quote to end the episode. The quote to end the quotes.
I think we can end there. It's an excellent quote. Thank you, Professor Julie, for that. I'm not saying your surname because I'm going to butcher it again. With that, TK, any closing thoughts to kind of summarize our conversation?
Well, I think, it's... look at the traps. We will put it in the episode description and maybe think hard, dear listener, about which ones you're falling into. Chances are you're a leader or a person that works with leaders, and it's a good reflection, like I did with the savior trap.
Yeah,
do that.
Yeah, do that reflection. And as Professor Julie says, it's not about authority. Don't confuse the two. And you don't need to be behind the hierarchy to have power. It can be anywhere, really, to some extent. So there you go. With that, thank you to all our listeners for sticking with us and for listening to today's episode. We hope you're enjoying our podcast. And if you are, please do like or subscribe and share it with your friends and colleagues.
Yes. Tell your friends and colleagues all about this podcast.
Definitely do that. And with that, thank you very much. And we'll see you in our next episode. Thank you. Bye-bye.